People think the biggest competitor to electric cars is gasoline. It isn't. The real enemy has always been time. Every minute spent waiting at a charger reminds people why they're still unsure about switching to an EV. For years, car companies have been trying to make that wait a little shorter. But what if one company didn't just reduce charging time? What if it completely changed the conversation? That's exactly what BYD is claiming with its next generation Blade battery. And if those numbers hold up in the real world, this might be one of the biggest breakthroughs the EV industry has seen in years. For almost a decade, the electric vehicle industry has been fighting the same battle. Every year, batteries became bigger, cars became faster, driving range improved, charging stations became more common. On paper, electric cars kept getting better. Yet one problem refused to disappear. It wasn't speed, it wasn't design, it wasn't even range anymore. It was the simple fact that people still hated waiting. Think about how we drive today. Filling a gasoline car usually takes just a few minutes. You stop, refuel, and you're back on the road before it even feels like your journey has been interrupted. Electric cars changed that experience. Even with modern fast chargers, drivers often plan their trips around charging stops. Some don't mind it. Others see it as the one thing stopping them from switching to an EV. That's why battery technology has quietly become the most important battlefield in the automotive industry. Most people think companies like Tesla, BYD, Toyota, CATL, and others are competing to build better cars. They're not. They're competing to build a better battery, because the company that solves charging doesn't just sell more cars, it changes how people think about electric vehicles altogether. For years, Tesla led that conversation. It proved electric cars could be desirable, fast, practical, even exciting. Toyota focused on hybrids while developing future battery technologies behind the scenes. Chinese companies expanded faster than almost anyone expected. And somewhere in the middle of all that competition, BYD was quietly building something that wasn't getting as many headlines outside China, until now. Because BYD isn't talking about shaving 1 or 2 minutes off charging time. They're talking about something that sounds almost unbelievable. A battery that can go from low charge to nearly full in around 9 minutes under the right charging conditions. Read that again, not 30 minutes, not 20, around 9. If you followed electric vehicles for a while, you probably had the same reaction many engineers did. There has to be a catch. And honestly, that's a fair question. Whenever a company announces numbers that look too good to be true, skepticism is healthy. The EV industry has seen ambitious promises before. Prototype batteries, laboratory results, technologies that looked incredible during presentations but took years to reach real production, or never did. That's exactly why this story is interesting, because BYD isn't just talking about a battery chemistry in a research lab. They're introducing a complete charging ecosystem designed to support those speeds, and that changes the conversation. You see, people often think charging speed depends only on the battery. It doesn't. Imagine buying the fastest smartphone in the world. Then plugging it into a 5-year-old charger. Nothing changes. The charger becomes the bottleneck. Electric cars work the same way. A battery might be capable of accepting enormous amounts of power, but if the charging station can't deliver it, those numbers become meaningless. BYD understood that. Instead of upgrading only the battery, they also focused on ultra-high power charging infrastructure capable of delivering dramatically higher charging rates than previous generations. That's an important detail many headlines completely skip, because this isn't just a new battery, it's an entirely new charging strategy. And that's exactly why the automotive industry is paying attention. The headline everyone remembers is 9-minute charging. The real story is how BYD is trying to make that possible, and this is where the engineering becomes fascinating. Traditional lithium-ion batteries have always lived with a difficult compromise. Charge too slowly. People complain. Charge too quickly. Heat becomes the enemy. Excessive heat reduces efficiency, affects battery longevity, and creates engineering challenges that every manufacturer has to manage. For years, companies kept pushing the limits while trying to avoid those problems. Some improved cooling, others changed battery chemistry, some increased voltage. Everyone was chasing the same goal, more speed, without sacrificing safety, BYD believes its next-generation Blade battery takes another major step towards solving that equation. But charging speed isn't the only number turning heads, because something even more surprising happened during cold weather testing. Anyone who owns an electric vehicle knows winter can be frustrating. Battery performance drops, charging slows down, range decreases. In some regions, winter is still one of the biggest reasons people hesitate before buying an EV. BYD says its latest battery dramatically improves charging performance even in extremely cold temperatures, where traditional EVs often struggle the most. If those results continue to hold up outside controlled testing, it could remove one of the biggest practical concerns EV owners still have today. And suddenly, this story isn't just about charging anymore. It's about removing excuses. No more waiting, less impact from winter, longer trips becoming easier. That's exactly the future every EV company has been chasing. But here's the question nobody seems to be asking. If BYD has really developed a battery this capable, why isn't everyone talking about it the way they talked about Tesla's battery breakthroughs? The answer has very little to do with the technology, and almost everything to do with where the company comes from. To understand why everyone in the EV industry is suddenly paying attention to BYD, you first need to understand one thing. Charging an electric car has never been just about electricity, it's about heat. The faster you try to push energy into a battery, the more heat it generates, and heat is one of the biggest enemies of battery performance. Too much of it can reduce charging efficiency, shorten battery life, and make the entire system much harder to manage safely. That's why, for years, every EV manufacturer has been fighting the same engineering battle. How do you charge faster without creating more problems? BYD's answer wasn't to focus on a single component, it redesigned the entire system. The company introduced what it calls its next-generation Blade battery platform alongside an ultra-high power charging architecture capable of delivering up to 1,500 kilowatts under the right conditions. On paper, that's a massive leap over what most public fast chargers deliver today. But here's something many people misunderstand. Seeing 1,500 kilowatts doesn't mean every BYD owner will suddenly charge at that speed tomorrow. Charging speed depends on several things working together. The battery has to accept that amount of power, the vehicle has to support it, the charging station has to deliver it, and the surrounding infrastructure has to handle it safely. If even one of those pieces is missing, the experience changes. That's why BYD isn't launching just a battery, it's trying to build an entire ecosystem around it. And that's exactly what makes this announcement different from many battery headlines we've seen before. Now, let's talk about the number that grabbed everyone's attention, around 9 minutes. That's the charging time BYD says its new platform can achieve under ideal conditions for a supported vehicle and charger. If those numbers continue to hold up outside controlled demonstrations, they could fundamentally change how people think about EV charging. Because something interesting happens when charging becomes that fast. People stop comparing electric cars to other electric cars. They start comparing them to gasoline cars. For years, EV owners accepted that charging required planning, route planning, charging stops, battery percentages, apps, availability. Imagine if much of that mental calculation simply became less important. That's the psychological shift BYD is chasing. Not just a faster battery, a different ownership experience. But charging speed isn't the only headline. Cold weather has always been one of the toughest environments for electric vehicles. Anyone living in Northern Europe, Canada, or parts of the United States knows exactly what winter can do to battery performance. Lower temperatures slow down the chemical reactions inside the battery. Charging becomes slower. Available range drops. Drivers often spend extra time preconditioning the battery before fast charging. It's one of the biggest reasons some buyers still hesitate before switching to an EV. BYD claims its latest battery platform dramatically improves this experience. According to the company, even in temperatures as low as minus 30 degrees Celsius, the battery can charge from 20% to 97% in roughly 12 minutes under supported conditions. That's an ambitious claim. And if independent real-world testing continues to support it, it would represent one of the most meaningful improvements in cold weather EV usability we've seen in recent years. Notice something interesting? The most impressive part isn't actually the number. It's what the number represents. For years, cold weather was considered one of the biggest weaknesses of electric vehicles. BYD isn't trying to eliminate winter. It's trying to eliminate winter as an excuse. That's a very different goal. Then there's the question of driving range. BYD has also demonstrated vehicles capable of exceptionally long driving distances under China's CLTC testing cycle, with some models targeting figures around 1,000 kilometers on a full charge. Now, it's important to keep expectations realistic. Testing standards vary. CLTC numbers are generally more optimistic than EPA ratings used in the United States. Real-world driving always depends on speed, weather, terrain, traffic, and driving style. That's true for every manufacturer, not just BYD. But regardless of the testing standard, the direction is clear. Battery technology is improving much faster than many people expected just a few years ago. And perhaps the biggest surprise is this: BYD isn't stopping here. While most companies are still focused on improving today's lithium-based batteries, BYD has publicly discussed plans to commercialize all-solid-state battery technology later in this decade, with deployment beginning around 2027 if development and production timelines stay on track. Think about that for a moment. The company is aggressively improving the batteries it sells today, while already preparing for the generation that could replace them tomorrow. That's not a short-term strategy, that's a long-term roadmap, and it explains why analysts are paying much closer attention to BYD than they did just a few years ago. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting, because building incredible battery technology is only half the battle. The other half is convincing the world that you're no longer just another Chinese automaker. And that challenge may actually be harder than building the battery itself. At this point, it's easy to think this is simply another battle between BYD and Tesla. But that's not really what's happening. Tesla changed the conversation by proving electric cars could compete with gasoline cars. BYD is trying to change the conversation again by making charging stop feeling like a compromise. Those are two completely different missions. For years, Tesla focused on software, superchargers, and building one of the world's largest EV ecosystems. That strategy helped push electric vehicles into the mainstream, but battery technology never stopped evolving. While Tesla continued improving its own cells and charging network, companies like BYD kept investing heavily in chemistry, manufacturing, and battery architecture. That's why this moment feels different. The question is no longer, can electric cars replace gasoline cars? That question has already been answered. The new question is, can electric cars become more convenient than gasoline cars? And that's a much harder challenge, because convenience isn't measured by horsepower. It isn't measured by acceleration. It's measured by how little you have to think. The less drivers think about charging, the more normal electric cars become. That's exactly what BYD is trying to achieve. If charging times continue to fall, battery performance continues improving, and fast charging infrastructure expands, the biggest psychological barrier holding back EV adoption could gradually disappear. Notice something interesting. A few years ago, every EV commercial talked about range. Today, the conversation is slowly shifting toward charging speed. That shift tells us something important. The industry is growing up. When early electric cars could barely travel a few hundred kilometers, range was everything. Now that many modern EVs already offer enough range for everyday driving, people are asking a different question. How quickly can I get back on the road? That's why announcements like this matter. Not because every driver suddenly needs a 9-minute charge, but because they push the entire industry forward. Competition has always accelerated innovation. Tesla pushed everyone toward better software. BYD is pushing everyone toward faster charging. Toyota continues investing in next-generation battery chemistry. CATL is introducing new battery platforms. Every major breakthrough forces competitors to respond, and that's exactly how technology evolves. One company moves first, the rest refuse to be left behind. Now let's come back to the comparison everyone wants to make. Can BYD beat Tesla? The honest answer depends on what you mean by beat. If we're talking about battery innovation, BYD has clearly established itself as one of the world's most influential battery companies. If we're talking about manufacturing scale, both companies are among the global leaders, each with different strengths in different markets. If we're talking about autonomous driving, Tesla is still investing far more aggressively. If we're talking about charging technology, BYD has just made one of the strongest statements the industry has seen in years. So this isn't a simple winner versus loser story, it's specialization. Tesla isn't trying to become BYD. BYD isn't trying to become Tesla. Each company is solving different parts of the same problem, and that's exactly why this competition benefits everyone. Because every breakthrough from one company forces another company to respond. The real winners aren't just shareholders, they're drivers. They get better batteries, better software, better safety, lower prices, and better technology every single year. Then there's one final piece of this story. BYD's roadmap doesn't end with the Blade battery. The company has already said it's working toward commercial deployment of all solid-state batteries later in this decade if development continues as planned. That matters because solid-state batteries have been described for years as one of the biggest potential leaps in EV technology. Higher energy density, potentially faster charging, improved safety, longer battery life. But they're also incredibly difficult to manufacture at scale. Many companies have promised them. Very few have brought them close to mass production. Whether BYD reaches that goal on schedule remains to be seen. But the fact that it's already planning beyond today's technology tells you something about the pace of this industry. Nobody can afford to stand still anymore, and maybe that's the biggest lesson from this entire story. The EV revolution isn't slowing down, it's accelerating. Every year, charging gets faster, batteries become safer, cars travel farther, software becomes smarter, and technologies that once sounded impossible slowly become normal. A decade ago, people questioned whether electric cars could replace gasoline cars. Today, the conversation is about whether charging can become almost as effortless as refueling. That's how quickly this industry is moving. So, has BYD solved EV charging? Not completely, infrastructure still needs to expand. Independent real-world testing will continue to evaluate these new systems. And long-term durability always matters just as much as headline numbers. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. BYD has moved the goalposts. Every other automaker now has to respond, because when one company changes expectations, the entire industry has to catch up. And that's exactly why this announcement matters. It isn't just another battery, it's another step toward making electric vehicles feel less like the future and more like the present. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more deep dives into the technologies shaping the future of transportation, don't forget to subscribe. Every day we separate real engineering from internet hype and explore the innovations changing the world, one breakthrough at a time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.